The first time I realized something was seriously wrong was when I woke up to the sound of my well pump running non-stop at 3 in the morning, even though every faucet in my house was off. I stood there in the dark, half awake, listening to the low mechanical growl and wondering who, exactly, thought it was a good idea to steal water from a private well like it was a public drinking fountain. What I didn't know yet was that the woman behind it all was about to destroy her own HOA career over a few gallons of groundwater she had absolutely no right to touch. At the time, all I knew was that my land was being siphoned, and whoever was doing it was confident enough to think I wouldn't notice. My property sits just outside the neat, manicured edge of a large suburban development, the kind with matching mailboxes and a homeowners association that loves rules more than reason. I bought it specifically because it wasn't part of that neighborhood. No HOA fees, no committees, no strangers voting on what color my fence should be. I had my own well, legally drilled, inspected, permitted, and documented. It was mine in every sense of the word, and I paid good money to make sure it stayed that way. The HOA next door, on the other hand, relied on a shared municipal water connection that had been strained for years. More houses kept going up, lawns kept getting greener, and complaints about low water pressure kept landing on the HOA board's desk. I knew this because people loved to complain out loud at the property line, assuming I couldn't hear them through the trees. I never thought those complaints would turn into action aimed directly at me. The pump noise didn't stop. I walked outside with a flashlight, barefoot on cold dirt, following the sound toward the well house. The light caught something that made my stomach tighten. The access panel had been opened. Not forced, not damaged, just opened like someone who knew exactly what they were doing had been there recently. A new hose ran from the well house, carefully routed through the brush toward the HOA side of the boundary. I just stood there for a moment, letting the absurdity sink in. Someone had connected themselves to my private water supply as if it were a community amenity. I shut off the pump, disconnected the hose, and coiled it neatly on the ground. I didn't cut it. I didn't damage it. I wanted whoever owned it to see it clearly in the morning and understand that I knew. I went back inside, but sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind started putting pieces together. The HOA president, a woman everyone whispered about but no one openly challenged, had been pushing for temporary water solutions for weeks. I had seen her at the edge of my property before, clipboard in hand, staring at the well house like it owed her money. I remembered the way she smiled when she noticed me watching her, the kind of smile that pretends to be friendly while already planning something ugly. By mid-morning, my doorbell rang with more confidence than politeness. I opened the door to find her standing there, dressed like she was headed to a city council meeting instead of my porch. Perfect hair, sharp blazer, clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. She didn't introduce herself. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, already stepping closer, as if proximity alone gave her authority. "The HOA accessed your well briefly due to an emergency water shortage." I leaned against the doorframe and waited. Silence has a way of making people uncomfortable, and she filled it quickly. "It's temporary," she continued. "Perfectly reasonable. The community needed it." The way she said needed told me everything. Not asked. Not requested. Needed, as if desire automatically turned into entitlement when enough people were involved. "You ran a hose onto my land, into my well house, and took water without permission," I said calmly. "That's not a misunderstanding." She smiled again, tighter this time. "Your property borders the HOA. Shared resources benefit everyone." "My well isn't shared," I replied. "It's private. Legally. Documented. Inspected." Her expression flickered, just for a second, before hardening. "The HOA board will be reviewing this. We can formalize an agreement." That was the moment I understood that she didn't see herself as someone asking for cooperation. She saw herself as someone granting permission after the fact. I told her the hose was on the ground where she left it, and that she was not to step onto my property again. She wrote something on her clipboard, lips pursed, and left without another word. For the rest of the day, HOA vehicles drove slowly past my fence. A maintenance truck idled near the boundary longer than necessary. Someone took photos from the sidewalk. It was intimidation dressed up as observation, and it only confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't over. It was just starting. That evening, I reviewed my well permits, inspection reports, and property surveys. Everything was in order. I called the County Water Resources Office and asked a few careful questions without making a complaint yet. I wanted information, not confrontation. What I got instead was reassurance that private wells were heavily protected and that unauthorized access was taken very seriously. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my fence. HOA letterhead. Language full of words like community impact and temporary necessity. No signatures, no legal citations, just a demand disguised as a discussion. They wanted to coordinate water usage until their issues were resolved. I laughed out loud when I read it, not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly overconfident. They genuinely believed they could pressure me into compliance simply by acting official enough. They had no idea how many cameras I had already installed, how many logs I was keeping, or how closely I was documenting every move they made. I didn't respond. Instead, I scheduled a formal inspection of my well, the kind that involved county officials, meters, and paperwork that didn't care about HOA titles. I knew one thing for certain. If they were bold enough to steal water, they were careless enough to leave a trail. And when inspectors start following trails, they don't stop at fences or feelings. As I watched the sun set over my land that night, the well house quiet and untouched, I realized that the HOA president had made a critical mistake. She had assumed my silence meant weakness. What she didn't know was that I was already setting the stage for the one inspection that would end her authority permanently. By the time the inspection date was confirmed, the HOA president had already decided she wasn't going to wait for it. I learned that the hard way when my water pressure dropped to nothing in the middle of a shower, leaving me standing there, dripping and staring at a faucet that hissed like it was mocking me. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a message. I pulled on clothes and headed straight to the well house. The access panel was closed, but the lock felt warm, like it had been handled recently. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. The hose was back, this time replaced with a more permanent-looking setup. New fittings. Proper clamps. Someone had upgraded from sneaking to settling in. I didn't touch anything. I took photos instead. Close-ups of the fittings. Wide shots showing the hose crossing my property line. Time-stamped footage from the cameras I had quietly installed the night after her visit. The HOA president hadn't just come back. She had brought help. An hour later, she showed up again, this time with two men in matching polo shirts and an attitude that suggested they thought they were untouchable. They stopped just inside my gate like they owned the place. "We need to talk," she said, voice sharp, eyes scanning the land behind me. "You need to leave," I replied, not moving aside. She ignored that. "The community has authorized temporary access. You're interfering with essential services." I let that hang in the air for a moment, then stepped aside just enough for her to see the camera mounted on the corner of the well house, its small red light blinking patiently. "You're trespassing," I said. "And you've been recorded every time." One of the men shifted uncomfortably. The other looked at her, waiting for direction. She didn't flinch. "We're allowed to be here," she said. "Your property creates a hardship for hundreds of families." There it was again. That word. Hardship. As if my land existed to solve problems she created. I told her, slowly and clearly, that she had no legal right to access my well, that the county had already been notified, and that any further interference would be documented and escalated. She laughed, short and dismissive. "You think the county cares about one person over an entire community?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a printed copy of my well permit, folded neatly, with highlighted sections she clearly hadn't bothered to read. I handed it to her. She glanced at it, then handed it back without looking closely. "This will be resolved internally," she said, already turning away. "Expect correspondence." They left, but the damage was done. My pump had been running under load it wasn't designed for. The pressure tank was struggling. That wasn't just theft anymore. That was risking damage to infrastructure I paid for. I shut the system down completely. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. Unknown numbers. Voicemails piling up. Complaints. Accusations. One message accused me of endangering children by cutting off water. Another threatened legal action. None of them mentioned the fact that they had been stealing from me. That afternoon, an official-looking letter arrived by courier. HOA seal. Bold language. Claims of emergency powers and implied consequences. No actual statutes. No signatures from anyone licensed to enforce anything. Just pressure. I forwarded everything to the County Water Resources office and added a note asking if they'd like the footage too. They did. The next day, the HOA president tried a different tactic. She caught me at the property line while I was checking fence posts, voice softer now, almost friendly. "We got off on the wrong foot," she said. "This doesn't have to be ugly." I looked at her and realized she genuinely believed this was a negotiation she could still win. That belief made her dangerous. "You hooked into my well without permission," I said. "Twice." "For the greater good," she replied smoothly. "We were going to compensate you." "You didn't ask." Her smile slipped just a little. "You didn't give us time." That was the moment I understood something important. In her mind, consent was something she granted herself when people didn't move fast enough for her liking. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was entitlement dressed up as leadership. I told her the inspection was scheduled, that county officials would be on site, and that she should make sure all HOA equipment was removed immediately. She nodded, still smiling, but her eyes were calculating. That night, my cameras caught movement again. Different people this time. Late. Careful. They didn't reconnect the hose. Instead, they tried to obscure the access point, covering tracks, adjusting fittings, wiping surfaces. They were preparing for something. I didn't stop them. I let them finish. Because by then, I knew what they didn't. The inspection wasn't just about water usage. It was about unauthorized modifications, unlicensed connections, and potential contamination risk. Every attempt they made to hide their actions only added another layer of evidence. When the confirmation email came in the next morning, my hands were steady. The inspection team would arrive in 48 hours. Multiple departments. Full review. I stood by the well house, listening to the quiet hum of a system resting safely offline, and felt something shift. The HOA president had spent weeks acting like rules bent around her. In 2 days, she was going to learn what happened when the rules finally pushed back. The morning of the inspection didn't start with officials or clipboards. It started with shouting. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when a sharp, frantic knocking rattled my front door like someone was trying to knock it off the hinges. Before I even reached it, I heard her voice through the glass, loud, practiced, and already performing for an invisible audience. "This is outrageous. You can't just shut off water to families." I opened the door and let the silence stretch for a beat before responding. She stood there alone this time, no entourage, no matching polos, just raw agitation barely contained under her professional shell. "You're not getting water from my well," I said evenly. "You're abusing your position as a neighboring landowner," she snapped back. "People are suffering because of you." That was the first time she openly tried to flip the narrative. I could almost see the script in her head, the version where she was the hero fighting a selfish landowner hoarding resources. The problem was reality didn't cooperate. "You stole from me," I said. "Twice." Her jaw tightened. "We accessed unused capacity." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was impressive how confidently wrong she could be. That's not how wells work. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. You don't want to make enemies in that neighborhood. I looked past her, toward the rows of houses beyond the trees. Lawns brown at the edges. Sprinklers silent. She wasn't worried about water. She was worried about control slipping. I didn't start this, I said. But I am finishing it. She stared at me for a long moment, eyes cold now, calculating. Then she turned and walked away without another word. No threats. No demands. That scared me more than the shouting. By noon, the HOA had escalated in a different direction. A glossy flyer appeared on the windshields of cars parked near my property. Big headline: Community Water Crisis. My land circled on a poorly drawn map, highlighted like a villain's lair. According to the flyer, I was withholding access to vital resources and refusing reasonable cooperation. There was still no mention of the illegal connection. No admission of trespassing. Just blame. I took photos of the flyers and added them to the growing digital folder labeled Evidence. It was starting to feel less like preparation and more like archiving a collapse in progress. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from the county inspector assigned to the case. His voice was calm, professional, and far more interested than he had been during our initial conversation. We reviewed the footage you sent, he said. And the documentation. I waited. We're expanding the scope of the inspection. That was all he said before hanging up. By evening, the HOA president tried another approach. She didn't come to my door. She went to my neighbors. One by one, people I barely knew started reaching out. Some were polite, others aggressive, all carrying the same talking points. Emergency. Children. Community. None of them mentioned the hose, the fittings, or the late-night visits. I responded to each message the same way. Brief. Calm. Factual. Private well. Unauthorized access. County inspection pending. Most stopped replying after that. One didn't. She showed up just before sunset, standing at the edge of my fence like she was afraid to cross an invisible line. Her tone was different this time. Not angry. Desperate. She's saying you're trying to bankrupt the HOA, the woman said. That you're doing this out of spite. I nodded slowly. Did she tell you they tapped into my well without permission? The woman hesitated. She said it was temporary. That's not an answer. The woman left without saying goodbye. That night, the cameras caught something new. The HOA president herself, back at the property line, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. She wasn't touching anything. She wasn't trespassing. She was watching. At one point, she stopped and stared directly at the camera, as if daring it to blink first. I saved the footage anyway. The next morning, a lawyer's letter arrived. HOA letterhead again, but this time with a real name attached. Threats of injunctions. Claims of implied easements. Language designed to intimidate, not withstand scrutiny. I forwarded it to the inspector too. When the inspection day finally arrived, it didn't come quietly. 3 vehicles. 2 departments. Clipboards, meters, official badges that didn't care about HOA politics. The lead inspector introduced himself, then went straight to the well house without asking permission. He didn't need to. This was exactly why inspections existed. The HOA president arrived late, flanked by 2 board members and a lawyer who looked like he regretted every life choice that brought him there. She smiled tightly, confidence dialed up like armor. "We're here to observe," she said. The inspector didn't even look at her. "You're here to answer questions." They measured flow rates, examined fittings, compared timestamp, reviewed footage. Every question led to another document, another log, another uncomfortable pause. The deeper they went, the quieter she became. When the inspector finally turned to her, his tone hadn't changed, but something else had. "Who authorized the installation of these fittings?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at her lawyer. "That's what I thought," he said. I stood back and watched as the narrative she had built began to collapse under the weight of facts. Not dramatically, not loudly, just methodically. By the time they packed up their equipment, the HOA president wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't arguing either. She was staring at the ground like someone realizing the game was already over. And for the first time since this started, I felt certain of something. She didn't just make a mistake. She made a record. The fallout didn't wait for paperwork. It started the same afternoon the inspectors left, before their vehicles were even out of sight. I was standing by the fence when the HOA president stormed back onto the edge of my property, her composure finally gone. No smile. No clipboard. Just anger spilling out now that the audience with authority had ended. "You ambushed us," she snapped. "You coordinated that." I didn't move. "You coordinated stealing water from a private well." Her face flushed. "We were solving a problem." "You created one," I said. "Several, actually." She pointed toward the well house like it was personally offending her. "That system has excess capacity. Everyone knows it. You're hoarding." There it was again. That word. Hoarding. As if owning something outright automatically made you immoral if others wanted it badly enough. "You don't get to decide that," I said. "And neither does your board." She took a step forward, then stopped herself just short of crossing the line. Her voice dropped, low and sharp. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. "The board will not forget this." That was supposed to scare me. Instead, it sounded like panic trying to wear authority one last time. She turned and walked away, heels biting into the dirt, and I realized something important. She wasn't talking like someone planning their next move. She was talking like someone realizing they were out of move. The official notice came 2 days later. Not from the HOA. From the county. Unauthorized access. Unlicensed modification. Potential contamination risk. Improper installation across a property boundary. Each line was short, clinical, and devastating. The kind of language that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. The HOA was ordered to cease all activity related to my well immediately and remove any connected infrastructure under supervision. Failure to comply would result in escalating fines and possible criminal referral. I printed it and taped it inside the well house, not as a threat, but as documentation. Everything from this point on would be witnessed. The HOA president didn't show up for the removal. Instead, she sent contractors. They arrived early, awkward, clearly uninformed. One of them handed me a work order that didn't mention a well, a boundary, or a county order. Just vague language about temporary water adjustments. I showed them the notice. They read it twice, then a third time, then packed up and left without touching a thing. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. I knew because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from residents who suddenly wanted clarity. Not confrontation. Not accusations. Just answers. Had the HOA really tapped into my well? Was it legal? Why were inspectors involved? Why hadn't the board disclosed any of this? I responded once, publicly, in the neighborhood forum she had used to distribute her flyers. No insults. No emotion. Just facts. Private well. Unauthorized connection. County action. Inspection records available upon request. Within minutes, replies flooded in. Some angry. Some confused. Some quiet apologies. One comment simply said, "Wait, she did what?" That was when the narrative finally cracked. The HOA president tried to regain control the only way she knew how. She sent out an email blaming a miscommunication, and claimed the connection had been installed by a contractor without full board approval. She positioned herself as someone misled, not responsible. The problem was the footage. The inspector had requested it officially, which meant it was now part of the county record. And county records don't care about rewritten stories. They care about timestamps, faces, and patterns. Her face appeared in those logs more than once. Late-night visits. Supervision. Direction. Authority. That evening, her lawyer contacted me directly. The tone was different. No threats. No accusations. Just careful language and long pauses. "We'd like to resolve this quietly," he said. "There's nothing left to resolve," I replied. "The county's handling it." Another pause. Longer this time. "She may be facing consequences beyond what you intend," he said. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but disbelief. As if I had orchestrated this for punishment instead of simply defending my property. "I didn't make her steal water," I said. "I didn't make her lie about it either." The next morning, a notice appeared on the HOA website. The president was stepping aside temporarily pending review. The word temporarily was doing a lot of work there, trying to sound hopeful in a situation that had none. Board members began distancing themselves. Statements changed. Language softened. Responsibility blurred. And through it all, one thing stayed constant. Every document, every email, every log. She had built her authority on the assumption that no one would challenge her with evidence. She had relied on confidence to replace consent and pressure to replace permission. Now she was learning the difference between power and proof. As I locked the well house that night, sealing it under county tags, I felt something settle. Not victory. Not relief. Just certainty. The HOA president wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting the record. And the record never blinks. The silence after her step-aside announcement didn't last. It never does when people who built their identity on control suddenly lose it. For a few days, things went quiet enough to feel unnatural. No cars idling by my fence. No emails. No flyers. The well sat sealed under county tags, untouched and officially off-limit. If this had been a movie, this would have been the calm before the storm. In real life, it was the sound of someone planning their last bad move. I noticed it first through the cameras. Late one evening, long after sunset, headlights slowed near the boundary again. Not stopping. Just rolling past. Then again 10 minutes later. Different car. Same behavior. By midnight, I had 4 separate clips of vehicles pacing the fence line like they were counting breath. I didn't shut the system down for paranoia. I shut it down because patterns don't lie. The next morning, I found fresh tire tracks where none should have been. Not deep enough to be careless, not light enough to be accidental. Someone had pulled in just far enough to look without committing. I took photos, measured distances, and added them to the file that was no longer just evidence but history. Around noon, my phone rang. It wasn't the county. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a board member. He didn't introduce himself at first, just cleared his throat like a man calling to confess something he'd hoped would stay buried. "We didn't know," he said. "Not all of us." I let him talk. He explained how the water issue had been framed as temporary, how the president insisted she had it handled, how dissent was discouraged, how questions were labeled as obstruction. It was the same story I'd heard before, just quieter now, stripped of confidence. "She told us you agreed," he added. "That was new." "When?" I asked. "Before the connection," he said. "She said you were being difficult, but cooperative." I thanked him for the call and hung up without promising anything. His guilt didn't change facts. It just explained how far she'd gone to maintain the illusion of authority. That afternoon, the county inspector called again. They had reviewed additional footage, expanded the investigation, cross-referenced contractor licenses, pulled permit histories. It turned out the fittings used weren't just unauthorized. They were unapproved for potable water connections, cheap, fast, installed to avoid scrutiny. That shifted things. Potential contamination wasn't just a risk anymore. It was documented negligence. By evening, the HOA president made her next move. She came back. Not to my door. Not to the well. She stood on the public sidewalk, just outside my fence, phone held high, recording herself. She spoke loudly, clearly, theatrically, like someone narrating their own innocence. "This is what happens," she said to her camera, "when one person weaponizes bureaucracy against an entire community." I watched from my porch, arms crossed, letting her perform. She talked about families, about pressure, about leadership sacrifices. She never mentioned hoses, or clamps, or nighttime visits. At one point, she turned the camera toward my land. "And this," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere, "is where it started." That was when I stepped forward. "Still recording?" I asked. She froze for half a second, then smiled wider. "Always." "Good," I said. "Then make sure you capture this." I held up the printed county notice, the cease and desist, the violation summary, the reference numbers. "You took water from a private well without permission," I said calmly. "You supervised the installation. You ignored warnings. You lied to your board. And now the county is investigating contamination risks." Her smile faltered. "Not completely. Just enough." "You're harassing me," she said to her camera. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting you." She stopped recording and walked away without another word. That video never got posted. What did get posted was something else entirely. 2 days later, an anonymous account uploaded screenshots of internal HOA emails, chains showing her dismissing concerns, overriding objections, instructing contractors to proceed quietly, advising board members to stop asking questions and trust leadership. The comments exploded. People weren't arguing anymore. They were comparing note, screenshot, timelines, stories about fines, threats, intimidation, patterns that only become obvious once fear loosens its grip. The board announced a formal internal review, then a special meeting, then, quietly, an external audit. The county followed up with their own notice, civil penalties, mandatory reporting, referral to the State Water Authority for further review. Her lawyer stopped calling. Her name disappeared from official HOA communications. One evening, as I was locking up the well house again under county supervision, I saw her across the street. No blazer, no clipboard, just standing there, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the structure like it had betrayed her personally. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the hose, the pump strain, the lies, the way she had stood on my porch and told me my property was a hardship. She looked up and saw me watching. Her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were scared. And that's when I understood something crucial. This wasn't about water. It never had been. It was about a woman who believed authority meant ownership, who mistook confidence for consent, and who thought rules existed for other people. Now the rules were staring back. And they weren't impressed. The special meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday night, which felt deliberate. Late enough to discourage attendance, early enough to control the narrative before rumors could grow legs again. It didn't work. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was full. Cars lined the street. People stood in small knots near the entrance, voices low, expressions tight. This wasn't a routine HOA gathering about lawn height or mailbox paint. This was a reckoning pretending to be administrative. I didn't plan to speak. I didn't need to. The record was already louder than anything I could say. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Board members sat stiffly at the front, papers stacked like shields. The president's chair was empty. Not symbolically. Literally. No nameplate. No explanation yet. Just absence. When the meeting was called to order, the vice president cleared his throat so many times it started to sound like Morse code for distress. He spoke carefully, slowly, as if each word had been vetted by 3 lawyers and a therapist. He announced an independent audit. He announced cooperation with county and state authorities. He announced that the former president had been placed on indefinite leave pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Someone in the back laughed. Not humor. Disbelief. Hands shot up. Questions flew. People wanted to know who approved what. Who knew when? Why no one was told? Why dues had increased right before the temporary solution? Why contractors were paid off cycle? The answers were thin, vague, defensive. Then someone mentioned my name. Not accusing. Asking. All eyes turned toward me, and for a moment, the room went quiet in that way that means people are ready to decide what kind of villain you are. I stood, slowly, hands empty, posture calm. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came because the truth is already public, and pretending it isn't won't help anyone. I explained the timeline. Briefly. Factual. No commentary. I talked about the hose, the fittings, the inspections, the footage, the county notices. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't editorialize. I didn't need to. When I finished, no one clapped. That wasn't the mood. What followed was worse for the board. People started talking to each other. Out loud. Comparing emails. Remembering threats. Recalling moments they'd dismissed as normal at the time. Patterns started connecting themselves without my help. The meeting adjourned early. The fallout didn't. Over the next week, things unraveled quickly. The audit uncovered irregularities far beyond the well. Vendor favoritism. Selective enforcement. Fines levied and then quietly waived. A culture built around fear of crossing one person who had convinced everyone she was untouchable. She wasn't. The State Water Authority completed their review and issued their findings. Unauthorized extraction. Supervisory negligence. False statements. The language was dry, but the impact was not. She was barred from holding any position related to water management, oversight, or community utilities. Permanently. That alone would have ended most HOA careers. It didn't end there. The county referred parts of the case to the district attorney. Not because they were eager to prosecute, but because the documentation demanded review. Whether charges would come wasn't clear yet. What was clear was that her name was now associated with words no one wants attached to them. Misrepresentation. Trespass. Endangerment. She disappeared from public view after that. No posts. No appearances. No sidewalk speeches. The house she once ruled from went quiet, blinds drawn, yard neglected. It was the kind of silence that follows people who lose not just power, but the illusion that made it possible. One afternoon, I received a final call from the inspector. "Your well is cleared," he said. "No contamination detected. No damage." I thanked him and hung up, leaning against the well house as the relief finally settled in. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes from knowing something important was defended properly. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I noticed movement at the edge of my property. She stood there again, just beyond the boundary, hands in her pockets, posture small. She didn't speak. She didn't approach. After a long moment, she said, "You didn't have to go this far." I met her gaze. "I didn't go anywhere. You came to me." She looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to stand on. She nodded once, stiffly, and walked away. For the first time since this started, the well hummed again, steady and lawful, doing exactly what it was meant to do. And for the first time, the neighborhood next door felt quieter. Not peaceful. Just honest. Because everyone now knew what had really happened. And once people know, power doesn't work the same way anymore. That was the strange part. For weeks, everything had revolved around my well, my land, my refusal. But once the investigations moved past the surface, it became clear I was just the door she'd kicked first. Behind it was a hallway full of damage no one had bothered to look down. The audit results were released quietly on a Friday afternoon, the classic timing for bad news. The HOA framed it as transparency. In reality, they were hoping people would be distracted. They weren't. The document was dense, dry, and devastating. Pages of financial discrepancies. Emails quoted verbatim. Decisions traced back to a single office, a single voice. Her voice. What started as a water issue had exposed a pattern of control that went years back, longer than most residents had lived there. Selective enforcement. Retaliatory fines. Vendors hired without bids. Complaints buried if they came from the wrong people. Favor granted to those who flattered her, punishment for those who questioned her. And it was all documented. Residents who had once defended her publicly started deleting old posts. Others stopped pretending they hadn't noticed the behavior. The tone shifted from anger to embarrassment, the kind that comes when you realize you trusted someone who never deserved it. The board resigned in pieces. One stepped down citing health reasons. Another cited family obligations. A third simply vanished from communications altogether. Interim committees were formed. Lawyers were hired. Meetings were rescheduled, then postponed, then rescheduled again. The HOA didn't collapse, but it fractured. The former president's name was removed from the website, then from archived newsletters, then from historical documents where it didn't strictly need to appear. It was quiet erasure, the kind organizations use when they want distance without apology. It didn't work, because residents started talking to each other directly. Stories came out. Not dramatic ones. Small ones. A fine that never made sense. A threat delivered privately. A rule enforced only once, against only one person. Individually, they had seemed petty. Together, they formed a pattern too clear to ignore. Someone started a shared document. Then another. Then a group chat. And once people compare notes, the spell breaks completely. One evening, I was walking the fence line when a man from the neighborhood approached, hands visible, cautious like someone stepping onto neutral ground. "I owe you an apology," he said. I waited. "I thought you were just being stubborn," he admitted. "She told us you were difficult." I nodded. "That's what she told everyone." He shook his head slowly. "We didn't ask enough questions." "No," I said. "You didn't." He thanked me for standing firm and walked away, shoulders lighter than when he arrived. That conversation repeated itself in different forms over the next few days. Different people. Same realization. They weren't thanking me for winning. They were thanking me for not backing down. The county closed its file shortly after, having referred everything it needed to refer. The State Water Authority issued a final notice confirming permanent restrictions against her involvement in any regulated water system. No appeals noted. No conditions. Just finality. Her house went up for sale. No announcement. No farewell post. Just a listing that appeared one morning like a quiet confession. The description emphasized privacy, community, opportunity. It did not mention leadership. I drove past once, unintentionally, and saw the yard sign leaning slightly, crooked in a way that felt symbolic. The place looked smaller without the weight of authority propping it up. The well inspection tags were removed a week later. Official clearance. No follow-ups required. I filed the paperwork, locked the door, and returned everything to normal operation. Normal felt different now. Not tense. Not triumphant. Just steady. One night, sitting on the porch, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her. Not at the HOA. Not even at the situation. Anger had been useful early on. It sharpened focus. It kept me alert. But it had done its job and left quietly, like it knew it wasn't needed anymore. What remained was clarity. She hadn't lost because I fought harder. She lost because she underestimated how fragile power becomes when it's built on assumption instead of permission. The HOA would recover. It always does. New rules. New faces. New promises. Some sincere. Some not. That wasn't my concern anymore. My land was quiet again. My well was secure. My boundaries were respected. And somewhere nearby, a woman who once believed she could take whatever she wanted was learning how permanent consequences feel. The story wasn't finished yet, but it was close. It happened on a quiet afternoon weeks after the for sale sign appeared, after the meetings ended, after the well tags came off and the inspectors stopped calling. The kind of quiet that settles in when a problem has truly passed and your body is just starting to believe it. When I opened the door, she was standing there. No blazer. No clipboard. No practice smile. Just a woman who looked smaller than I remembered, like authority had been a kind of armor she no longer wore. She kept her hands visible, posture careful, as if she understood now how lines work. "I won't take much of your time," she said. I stepped aside but didn't invite her in. She stayed on the porch, eyes flicking once toward the well house in the distance before returning to me. "I'm leaving," she said. "The house sold." I nodded. It didn't feel like news. She hesitated, then continued. "I told myself what I did was necessary. That leadership meant making hard choices for people who didn't understand the bigger picture." I said nothing. "That's how it starts," she added quietly. "You convince yourself you're the only one willing to do what's required." I studied her face and realized this wasn't an apology. It was an explanation she needed to say out loud before she could walk away from it. "You never asked," I said. "Not once." She flinched just barely. "I thought asking would slow things down," she admitted. "And I didn't think you'd say yes." "That's not consent," I replied. "That's convenience." She exhaled, long and shaky. "I know that now." For a moment, the air between us felt heavy, not with anger, but with something like loss. Not mine. Hers. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that I won't be doing this again. Anywhere." I believed her. Not because she sounded sincere, but because consequences had finally taught her what no argument ever could. She stepped back toward the stairs, then paused. "You could have cut the hose," she said. "Destroyed it. Called the police that first night." "I could have," I said. "But I wanted the truth to speak for itself." She nodded once, eyes down, and left without another word. When she was gone, I stood on the porch longer than I needed to, listening to the hum of the well in the distance, steady and familiar. It struck me then how simple the ending was compared to the chaos that led up to it. No shouting. No victory speech. Just boundaries holding. A few days later, a new HOA board was elected. I recognized none of the names. That felt right. The first notice they sent out was brief, direct, and refreshingly boring. It outlined revised procedures, transparency commitments, and a clear statement acknowledging past failures without excuses. No one mentioned me. That was fine. The well became just a well again. The land became just land. Not a symbol. Not a battleground. Just something owned, maintained, respected. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the pump kick on and feel a brief flash of that first morning, the confusion, the anger, the disbelief. Then it fades, replaced by something calmer. Trust in process. Trust in documentation. Trust in standing still when someone tries to push you into chaos. People ask me now what the lesson was. If I regret how far it went. If I would do anything differently. I tell them the same thing every time. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was cruel. I won because I didn't give away something that was mine just to make someone else comfortable. And somewhere out there, in a neighborhood that looks peaceful again from the outside, a story gets told quietly whenever a new board member suggests bending the rules for the greater good. It's the story of a private well. And how one inspection ended an HOA career forever.